Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Hope you're doing great wherever you're watching from. So, I went to a local bookstore looking for inspiration for my next build, and instead of finding an idea, it suddenly hit me. Rather than researching what to build next, why don't I just turn the book into the build? Like with all my builds, I started with a few quick thumbnail sketches to figure out the look, then refined it into a full-color illustration. Since I've been in a Halloween kind of mood lately, I figured, why not turn this into a full-on monster book? After a few rounds of designs, I finally landed on something I loved. Now all that's left is sculpting the fangs, gums, and an oversized tongue. So grab your popcorn, sit back, and let's get started. To make sure everything assembles just right, I printed out my rendering to use as a visual guide. I grabbed this old ragged book to be the canvas for my monster book. I'm using Das air hardening clay to sculpt the monster book's mouth. I start by brushing Mod Podge onto the pages with a 1-inch brush to glue them all together. Since this book's barely holding itself together, I've got to handle it with kid gloves. I'll start carefully at the back cover and work toward the center, slathering on plenty of Mod Podge as I go along. These pages are so delicate that they crumble to dust if I am not too careful. And yep, it's about to get really messy. Okay, one down and only 312 more pages to go. Well, looks like I'm finally getting close to the center of the book. When I get there, I'll have to repeat the entire process all over again for the other side. Let's see how it goes.
1 million, zillion, jillion, dillion, cotillion times later.
Now, I'll seal the edges completely, drenching them in even more Mod Podge. With the whole book literally soaked in Mod Podge, I make sure no spot is left untouched. Now I carefully close it gently, hoping it stays like this to cure overnight.
The next morning.
Next, it's time to work on the gums. Foam core serves as a template, with the upper section sketched as a guide. Here are the upper and lower gums of the monster book, and with a little movie magic, this is what they look like. Now, the Das air hardening clay gets cut open to start sculpting the gums, fangs, and tongue. These are the tools I'll be using to sculpt all the pieces. A thin sculpting spatula slices off a piece of clay, which gets kneaded, flattened, and pressed onto the foam core to form the upper gums. Next, the foam core template is pressed onto the clay to outline the basic shape for trimming. Once the shape looks right, a rounded dowel creates the placeholders where the fangs will sit. After that, it's time to put on my dentist cap and sculpt each of the fangs. More clay is kneaded until soft and pliable, then rolled out on the work surface into a long, thin cylinder. From that cylinder, individual pieces are carefully cut and trimmed, forming the separate chunks that will become a sharp and menacing fang. Each fang starts by rounding off the top section, then rolling the other end to a sharp point. Once the shape feels right, it's given a slight curve and brushed with a stiff sculpting brush to add heavy vertical cracks called craze lines that run along the fang's outer enamel. Off camera, I trimmed a section of foam core, creating a template for the tongue. Once the shape looks right, a large ball of clay is needed to sculpt the final tongue piece. Now the clay tongue is placed over the foam template, then flipped over and pressed in to create an outline that serves as a cutting guide. Then the top gets trimmed, followed by the right side and finally the left. With that step done, the center groove of the tongue is sculpted using a wooden sculpting tool to add depth and character to the piece. Afterwards, the sculpting brush is used again, lightly tapping the tongue to simulate taste buds. Off camera, I contoured the foam core template to the desired shape. At this point, I'll lay the clay tongue over the foam core to harden overnight. Geez, it kind of reminds me of Gene Simmons from Kiss, right?
1 day later.
Now that the pieces have cured overnight, they are placed into a jig for priming. I'm using Krylon spray paint that's both paint and primer in semi-gloss white. This makes the top coat colors much easier to apply later. When spraying, keep the can about 6 to 10 inches away from the surface and use smooth, even strokes to avoid drips or heavy spots. It's important to work in a well-ventilated area and always wear a respirator to protect your lungs from fumes.
Many hours later.
Okay, now that the primer has finally cured, I will apply Vallejo paints to weather the tongue, gums, and fangs. Crimson red goes down first onto the paint palette. This is followed by red. And finally, leather brown. The tongue gets a thick coat of crimson red, brushed on generously to work it into every nook and crevice. It looks pretty bloody right now, but that's just the base color. Darker tones will come in later to make it more realistic. And here are the upper and lower gum pieces and tongue, all dried and ready to go. With that done, it's time to weather the fangs. I'll start with a dark tone and gradually work toward lighter shades. Change of strategy. The dark to light paint method didn't work out as planned, so I flipped it around. Now I feel this is going to take a very long time. Finally, the last fang. Oh, wait. Now I have to do the dark colors.
1 eternity later.
After what felt like an eternity, I can now say the fangs are finally completed. To attach the tongue inside the book, I start by doing a dry fit, carefully placing it in the spot to make sure it fits perfectly and won't cause any issues later. Once I'm confident it lines up just right, I apply a generous but controlled amount of hot melt glue to the underside. I take my time here, making sure not to get burned in the process, and then slowly press the tongue into place, adjusting it as needed so it sits snugly and securely in the book. Now I flip the book over to attach the upper gum. I carefully apply a small amount of hot melt glue along the back edge, making sure to work safely and avoid any burns. Then I position the gum in place, taking a moment to align it just right and press down firmly so it sits perfectly and securely inside the book. A little adjustment here and there ensures it looks natural and ready to snap shut or scare anyone who dares to open it. At this stage, it's time to start attaching the fangs to the upper portion of the gums, and I begin from the back, carefully working my way forward. This part requires a lot of focus because each fang has to go in the exact spot. If even one molar ends up in the wrong place, the whole mouth could look off, and I'd have to start all over again. To attach the first molar, I drop a tiny bead of hot melt glue into the cavity, taking care not to overdo it. Then I dig through the pile of fangs to select the perfect one, checking its size and angle. Once it's chosen, I carefully align it over the glue spot, making sure it's oriented correctly and fits firmly, and press it gently but into place. I pause for a moment to double-check the position before moving on, because this is the foundation for the rest of the fangs, and getting it right now saves a lot of headaches later. Each subsequent fang follows the same careful process. Glue, select, align, press, building the full set of sharp teeth until the upper gums are fully armed and ready to bite. With the last fang finally glued into place, I step back and take it all in. Every curve of the fangs and that wildly detailed tongue all come together perfectly. At this moment, with everything assembled just right, I can confidently call this monster book officially complete. Almost forgot. Time to make the book look like it's hovering. I start by drilling 4 pilot holes in the bottom, so it will sit just slightly off the surface. Once the holes are ready, I take each nail glide, add a small dab of hot melt glue, and carefully press it into place. These tiny feet lift the book just enough to create the illusion that it's floating above the table, giving it a spooky, otherworldly vibe. From certain angles, it almost looks alive, like it could snap shut or lash out at any moment. Just the kind of eerie, magical touch that brings this monster book fully to life. And there you have it, my friends. My take on a monster book. Inspired by a trip to my local bookstore. I've got to say, I really love how everything came together. From the cracked fangs to the textured tongue, all wrapped in that eerie old-world charm. It feels like something you'd stumble across on a dusty shelf and immediately second-guess picking up. As a Halloween prop, this thing really shines. It would look incredible worked into your decor, sitting on a mantle, tucked into a themed shelf, or even staged as a spooky centerpiece in a library or office. It's not overly flashy, but that's what makes it work. It quietly pulls people in. Guests will spot it out of the corner of their eye, do a double take, and then lean in a little closer, just to make sure it's not about to bite. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that bell, comment, and share. To help support the channel, please check out my Etsy store at toyandpropmasters.etsy.com, where you'll find something for everyone. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next build.